Hi, Smart News. Today we have time for a sampler, a whole bunch of different news items. So that include Congress and their Cinderella complex, baseball, basketball, the real estate housing market, burnout, and maybe something else. I mean, we're really going to cover a lot of ground. It's going to be a lot of fun. I love these where we do like a small bites of a lot of stories that you should know about. Fun fact, as soon as I start any live video, something happens in my neighborhood. I'm seeing multiple neighbors just start their yard work. So if you hear lawnmowers, it's not in my yard, but I'm expecting a helicopter to land on my lawn. As most mothers know, anytime you have a little bit of quiet, it's interrupted. It's just where we are in our life right now. So if you have that background noise, just go with it. All right, let's talk about what's going on with Congress and the Cinderella complex, as they call it, because it's always about that midnight deadline. You know, once the clock strikes, that's what the Congress is always going for, especially when it comes to this funding bill that we've talked about, this large social spending bill that Democrats are trying to pass through Congress. So here's where things stand today, because I told you earlier in the week, once the clock strikes midnight between Thursday and Friday, then the government runs out of funding and we can see a government shutdown. It doesn't look like that at this time. Depending on when you watch this video, check the captions for updates. What it looks like right now is that there's going to be a smaller funding bill that's going to pass. So that $3.5 trillion plan, there's not agreement on it. There's going to be a smaller funding bill that's going to be passed that's going to get us to the beginning of December. Now, a couple things about that. That's not always a great sign because it just delays a lot of debate right around the holidays when nobody wants to do a lot of work, including lawmakers. So that can also lead to another showdown in December. So this is delaying an issue about government funding, but it's basically a Band-Aid for the time being. What we also were watching at the beginning of the week was an infrastructure bill. This was a bill that had bipartisan agreement and, roads, construction, repair, things that a lot of people can get behind, right? We don't want potholes on our roads. So this is going to be something that was going to be looked at as a victory for both parties, potentially. Now there's a question about whether or not it's going to have support, and here's the reason why. Some Democrats that are considered more progressive or liberal that really supported this larger spending bill are angry at Democrats that could be described as more moderate for holding up that bill. And so there's a question about whether or not they're going to take a stand against the infrastructure bill, not give enough votes in the House for it to pass, to basically say, hey, listen, we're not going along with things just to get along. We want this other spending bill going through. So that's something to watch today. It may or may not be drama on Capitol Hill. May or may not. So let's just see what happens. But this is a reason why this story matters is not just about government funding and not having a government shutdown. It's also a reminder that so often when we cover political stories, it's always Democrats versus Republicans. But politics is multifaceted. And oftentimes the debates that are happening within parties themselves also are really fascinating and strategically difficult. And Democrats are experiencing this right now. We'll, of course, have other opportunities to see it within the Republican Party as well. But really the focus is on the Democrats because they have the majority in the House, in the Senate, and the White House. Last night, there was a baseball game played by Congress. This sort of gives us a little levity. This is an annual game, dates back like decades. And it's a game where, Democrats and Republicans actually play baseball against each other. Here's the president there at the game. The Republicans won last night. For what it's worth, I don't think you're going to be quizzed on that later, but here's the Republicans winning. And so it was interesting, you asked the question, really during this very busy time, is baseball really where we need to be? Well, one freshman lawmaker said, I was able to shake the hand, he was a Republican, I was able to shake the hand of someone on the other side on the field, and I don't get to do that a lot on Capitol Hill. And that was a really nice feeling. I'm paraphrasing him there. So who knows? Maybe there's a breakthrough because of baseball. You never know what's going to break the tension. So we'll see. I want to talk to you a little bit about basketball now because there's been a lot of stories about the NBA this week and COVID-19, and that's because we have the rough outline, according to the Associated Press and others, of what the NBA's policy will be for vaccinations, and that's getting a lot of attention. One player in particular, and you're going to see him later today on Smarter News, not during a live interview, but we're going to cut a soundbite from him that's getting a lot of attention. This is Jonathan Isaac, the Orlando Magic. He came out and said he wasn't interested in taking the vaccine, and so he got a lot of attention because of his explanation. So I want to play the whole thing for you. But the NBA's rules are very interesting. They're not mandating a vaccine. What they are doing is very strict requirements for players that are not vaccinated. For example, not sitting inside and eating with other players if they're not vaccinated or wearing masks. And so it's just another example of a large entity, a large organization trying to navigate this time. We saw something very similar with the NFL. The NFL is a little bit more strict strict in trying to incentivize players to get vaccinated because they could be punished otherwise. So there's not mandates for these sporting teams, but there's ways in which the league is trying to encourage it and also negotiate with the players' union. And the players' union is very powerful because this is their terms of employment. What's really important to know when it comes to both of these stories, though, is more than 90% of players, or about 90% of players, are vaccinated at this time. And so often we look at these large debates about who's getting that vaccine mandate, or where the vaccine is the issue. And for the most part, it's important to note that in these stories, at least in these cases, most of the players have actually already been vaccinated. That's also interesting to note when we're looking at healthcare workers and vaccine mandates. We just posted a story about this on Smarter News because this week we saw New York, which is, a major state, really enforce their vaccine mandates, the first of its kind for healthcare workers in America. And what's really important to know is over the next several weeks, you're going to see this from a bunch of different states. So it was New York, it's going to be California, it's going to be Colorado. They're all a little bit different. New York is a little bit more strict. The two sides are very clear. One side says, hey, this is a health emergency. You're working in healthcare, if you're a nurse or you're at a healthcare facility, long-term healthcare facility, for example, we believe in the vaccine. I'm speaking about the government. And so you should be vaccinated. This is their argument. We have to keep patients safe. This is one way we know how to do it. So we're going to do it. The other side says, wait a minute, do we really know that? Do we know that to be the case? And if I'm a healthcare worker, I've worked around this virus and pandemic for the last year and a half. And so should I have to be mandated in order to do my work at this point? So you have really two strong arguments on both sides. What's important to know in New York is, again, going back to that 90%, about 90% of healthcare workers are now vaccinated in New York. So there still is, however, even if that's the case in a high rate, you're still talking about hundreds of thousands of healthcare workers. So if 8% or 5% decide not to get vaccinated and lose their jobs, you're seeing a potential effect on healthcare providers. And so that's another reason to pay attention to this. Other side story, and Julie, if you're watching, Julie was a nurse that joined us on a live over the last couple of weeks, and she shared something with us that's really important, and I just want to flag for you, because there is an ongoing conversation about natural immunity. We're seeing it in the NBA. We're seeing it also with these healthcare mandates, and let me explain. If you're a nurse in some hospitals, in some areas, if you're required to be vaccinated, let's say for the measles, sometimes you can do blood work, and the blood work shows you through your antibody levels how good your immunity is. Let's say to the measles. I've been vaccinated for the measles. How good is my immunity now? I don't know. If it was, for example, at a lower level, I could be recommended to get a measles booster. And in some cases, in some hospitals, if you show immunity to a disease, then you're not necessarily required for that booster or that extra vaccination. So some healthcare workers are not necessarily against the vaccine for a philosophical reason. They're saying, listen, I want this option for COVID-19 because I had a previous infection, or I worked around a lot of sick people. So check my immunity out and see if this is something that I really need. And so I think that's not widespread right now, but could we be moving in that direction where COVID-19 is sort of like that? It depends. It depends how many variants we see and if that's going to be possible for healthcare workers at some point. But I didn't know that about healthcare workers. Talked to a girlfriend last night. Hey, have you been tested for this? She's like, yeah, all the time. I didn't know that. So that's sort of an interesting kind of side story that also needs to be added to this conversation. The conversation of natural immunity seems to be gathering momentum. That basketball player I mentioned in his story was picked up by the Washington Post, detailed all these kind of side comments by people like Anthony Fauci saying, really, we now need to consider more natural immunity. So it's a conversation I'm going to be watching. Very curious about that. All right. How do you guys feel about the housing market? How much would you pay for this house particular? It was in a fire last month and it is in Massachusetts. How much do you think that costs? Just spitball it off the top of your head. How about nearly $400,000? This house is getting a lot of attention in Massachusetts for this reason, because it's a high price and, it has a little bit of damage. I mean, if you look around to the side, I was checking it out just to see, because, in my mind, I was like, if Ben and Aaron from Hometown on HGTV got a hold of this house, what could they do? I think they could do a lot, Ben and Aaron. I see you. This house, though, is an example of the housing market. And one thing you should know this week is we saw another data point that is showing record sales for housing all over the country. This has really baffled a lot of economists because it's like, hey, wait a minute, I thought we were in a recession at some point because of the pandemic. But no, supply is so limited still. Inventory is so low that people continue to just be priced out of the market. It's happening all over the country. There are some signs potentially of that maybe. I can't even say that with a straight face. If some analysts say, well, it looks like maybe more inventory will come on because prices have reached a certain level, but they've been saying that for the last year. So we'll see. But that's something that is happening in the housing market. Okay, final thing today. I thought this was really interesting. Are you feeling burnt out? How are you feeling? Feeling a little burnt out. And I like consistently for a long time. Well, McKinsey, which is a major consulting firm, and Lean In, which is that organization created by Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook, they did a survey on burnout and specifically women in the workplace. And hold that in your mind for a second because I want to show you this. This is the Wall Street Journal wrote up about it. And I thought it was so interesting. What they're basically showing is that women are feeling burnt out. And in fact, they're feeling burnout, I'm going to read it, at even higher rates than last year. They're feeling at higher rates than their male counterparts, but higher rates than last year at this time, which is a little bit of a shocker to researchers because you think, well, we got that huge panic of the pandemic last year. So wouldn't people feel better? And what they're finding out is not necessarily feeling better. That's a really interesting study. I'm going to tuck it into our newsletter this weekend for you to check out, but I have really exciting news for you. We often reference studies and research. 10,000 people responded to this. You're going to have an opportunity to be part of some new research. I can't wait to tell you about it. It is loosely related to this, but while this study is really focusing on corporate America, which by the way, I totally would not be included in because I'm not working a corporate job, and maybe you wouldn't either. Some new research is coming out that casts a wider net that you're going to be able to participate in. And it's going to be really exciting. So you're going to be able to participate in it, and then we'll be able to see the conclusions. I think that's cool. I've never really participated in that sort of study before. So I'm excited about that. One of the things the Wall Street Journal did say in their write-up of this survey and other topics was that more women are turning to entrepreneurship, that maybe that's the more flexible schedule. Maybe that's just like, I have to pursue my dreams now because you never know what's going to happen. But that was also inspiring. So it wasn't all bad news. It wasn't all like charred, burnt out women, which is like the house. You see how that works? I didn't even put it together when I started this. That's how I feel sometimes towards the end of the week. Anybody else? It's nice to be able to deliver the news and do it with a smile and actually mean it. So thank you for that. Not burnt out when I do this. I'm not burnt out when I do this. This is a highlight. So thank you for that. All right, guys, send in your stories. Always collecting for the sampler every week, and things that aren't necessarily on our website always get tucked into our newsletter. So if you don't see some of these stories on the website today, know they're going into our newsletter on Saturday. And P.S., we are putting a special announcement in our newsletter on Saturday morning, and it's going to go to newsletter recipients first, and there's limited supply. So I'm just telling you, if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, you want to check it out this weekend, go to our website and go ahead and sign up. All right. Have a great day, guys. More on smartnews.com. Thank you so much for your support. Really love seeing you. All right. Have a great day. Bye.